Hello, everybody. My name is Kaylee Baskett, and I actually just started working with Jeff at Slap 5, and I'll be managing the client services. And part of that includes some of the customer interviews that we're going to be talking about today and performing customer research as well.
My name is Steve Rankel. I've been a partner and crime of Jeff Ernst for years. I'm a massive fan of Customerx. Excited to be here.
Really, to tee things up, I wanted to revisit exactly what Jeff just brought up. So, on the first day of this conference, he sat down and made a pretty bold statement, which is that there is kind of a new job description for what the customer marketer is. This didn't really exist in the market and in such a prolific way as it does today. And so, as this job description itself has been evolving, we're seeing some new requirements. And so today, what Steve and I are really going to be focused on are those two foundational layers there. So gathering and representing the customer's voice and infusing that into every part of the organization, product, customer experience, and really elevating yourself to be able to have conversations with your executives and hopefully eventually get a seat at that table as well. All right, so earlier during the conference, we heard, I believe it was Lisa from Forrester saying that 2021 is the year of the customer marketer. And that's really exciting and wonderful. And one of the things that we want to make sure is that it's not just 1 year for the customer marketer, right? We don't want this to be a fad. We want to be able to ensure that the types of activities that customer marketers are doing and the value that you're bringing to your organization is so strong that we see this over the next 10 years at least, and hopefully we can make sure that there's no ice age in terms of being a customer marketer. Steve, are you with us? Do you have anything to add here?
I am. Can you guys hear me okay?
Yes.
Okay, so it looks like my video is having the worst hair day it ever had. And so we're just going to have to focus on the slides. Yeah, I think the bottom line here is this is the entire game. And I know you guys have heard a lot of topics this week, and I've been impressed to see the reviews and see the different comments and the engagement. But here's the deal. If you can't figure out how to interview your customers, everything else is going to fail. This whole thing falls down. And I think we have a slide on that, right, Kaylee?
Yes, we do.
I guess it's not the next one. All right, let me just dive in with the stories and just explain to you or share with you where this all started. I live in the Boston area, and if you have the fortune of being here, then you know that your children are very happy because it's snowing, and us who have to shovel it are not all that happy unless we're skiers. And outside of Boston, there was a group there was 5 guys in a garage that asked me to help them with their marketing over a decade and a half ago. And they said, we offer a generic service which is being outsourced to India. We do websites and data-driven technology and a bunch of other stuff. And here's the problem. We don't know how to differentiate ourselves from our customers, from our competitors, and we'd love your help. Can you help us, Steve? And of course, as a good marketer and sales guys, I said yes, but I wasn't sure what to do. And I said, well, I would like you to give me a list of 10 customers. And they said, we can give you 9. And I said, I'll take them. So I interviewed those customers. And next slide, Kaylee. So I captured the hypothesis of what that company said. They said, well, you're going to expect this, 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 and this. This is what clients buy from us. This is why they stay. This is what they do, et cetera, et cetera. Type in the chat box if you would. Take a wild guess how many said what my client told me to expect. And I'm sorry, Dana, I'm going to ask you to be gunged in here and carry the water back and forth. So if you would mind just reading off Oh, I can actually see some of these chats. So I see one. Four, one. Okay. Zero. None. Nobody. So my client talked about technology and features and functions and other things like that. And what their customer said was they're calm. They're peaceful. I get a single point of contact. And here's the interesting thing about it. Not one of those 9 customers knew each other existed before this particular event, my interview with them. None of them talked to each other. They didn't collaborate. They actually spoke and said mostly the same thing. And then about 14 days into this effort, I walked into the business, and while meeting with the CEO, he said, "Hey, Steve, I know that you're not done doing the work, but is there any chance we can take what you have learned and actually somehow use it to sell? We've got a brand new prospect. It's the biggest prospect we've ever gotten." And time slowed down. It felt like it was an hour, but it was probably a second. I thought, oh my gosh, I'm not even done with this work. And I said, yes. And so I began sitting in on the sales calls with this particular client. Now, remember, I don't know much about this industry. I don't have industry experience. I've never worked with their customers before. I have some familiarity with the company, but most of my learning has come from the customers. And I show up back at the company a couple of weeks later, next slide, and the CEO says, "Steve, because of you, we've just landed the biggest client we ever have in 2 weeks on the phone without a single in-person meeting, which has never happened to us and doesn't happen in our industry because we're one of the highest priced offerings." And the deal was right around 6 figures, which for some companies isn't that big. For 5 guys in a garage, it was huge. And then they said, "Steve, can we extend our contract?" That's the beginning of what's a story that's repeated itself over and over and over again. I went in and took over a product at Dictaphone that was failing after $10 million of investment. We turned that product around in just months, sold that company for several $100 million. These numbers here represent what happens and what happened when myself, and it's not me, my teams, the teams around me have decided to lock into what customers wanted, mirrored their language, got customer fluent. I think you've heard that word before from Jeff, being customer fluency, and really communicated and based everything we did on the customer beyond simple lip service. All right. So part of our challenge in this event, what Jeff asked us to do was, could you teach a paid workshop for several hours and basically show people and teach people how to interview their customers, because this is an absolutely critical skill. Everything else depends on it. And I said, because of a number of things, we couldn't. So in the last month, we have shot probably 70 different videos, created a workbook, worksheets, and what we're trying to do is take 8 modules, 3 hours, and 23 videos of the first customer interview framework course that exists. You can look on the web, it doesn't happen anywhere, that we're going to release shortly, and turn it into basically 45 minutes. Kaylee, next slide. One more. So that's the course. Screenshot this if you want. Take a picture of it with your iPhone. This is this is what I would tell you, having done this over and over again, and having had organizations generate these kind of results. These are the things you're going to have to master. But rather than putting you through 3 hours and other stuff, what we've done is we've taken 7 keys. By the way, the top right-hand side logo is the AIPMM. That's an International Product Marketing and Management Association. They're going to be releasing the course probably in the beginning of next year. They're our partner in crime. So what we've done here is we've got 7 keys that we are going to focus on. You can take a screenshot of that or a picture of that. We're going to launch into these one by one. What I'm trying to do is to give you 80-20 rule, the 20% that generates 80% of the results. Knowing that it's Friday afternoon, you're probably tired, you might be evented out, and here we go. So first line, first key. Okay, so I want to make you familiar of something that is your enemy that you may or may not know about, and you probably have experienced this, but maybe never named it. And that is the concept of value hallucination. And value hallucination, whether the company that hired you knows this or not, they hired you to fix this. And value hallucination is when the smartest people get around a table or a whiteboard and they all say, hey, Jennifer, what do you think the customer wants? Oh, that's great. Bob, what do you think the customer wants? Howard, what do you think the customer wants? Jim, what do you think the customer wants? And then everybody gets really excited and they're like, you guys are great. Or they ask the customer success team, what do you think the customer wants? You guys talk to them all the time. And the only person not in that conversation is a customer. That, what comes up as a hypothesis, as an answer, is your enemy. That is what you're going to have to combat. We're going to talk about how to do that in the rest of these slides. But what I like to say to people is that if you're an effective customer marketer, you're in the surprise business. Your job, my job, having run an agency and now running customer insights at a very large portfolio company, is to bring insights to the executive team and to the company that they have never heard, that they don't normally think about, that are straight from the customer's mouth, that are inarguable. And this, I want you probably can picture in your brain the meetings that you've had. Type in the chat box, if you will. How many of you guys have sat in a meeting where people were talking about exactly what customers wanted and saying this is what they want, or that's what they want, or what we should do, and the only person not in that room was a customer? Yep, exactly. So we're beginning to get responses. I don't want to slow us down because we have a lot of meat, but yes, right? Been there, yes, done that, yep. Okay, now let's move to key number 2. Thank you, Shelley, for your comment. Kaylee.
Awesome. Yeah, so key number 2 in terms of interviewing your customers is called the law of familiarity. And this is essentially a bias that we all have. It's, a hidden bias that works against you in any customer interview that you might do. So today you might think, and organizations traditionally think that the people who are closest to the customers are the ones who you want to mine for information because the customers are going to tell them everything, right? Well, the reality is that there's something that happens when you have a little bit too much familiarity with someone where you edit out all of this nuanced information about a certain topic. So, Steve, I think you have a great story about this one in particular. I'd love for you to tell that story.
Sure. So my wife and I have now longer, but had about a 20-year association with a nonprofit. We donated money, we raised money, we volunteered, we even knew one of the executives there. And so we thought, hey, we really know this organization and what they stand for and what they do. Turns out that I took on in a past life a company that held them as a client and asked me if I would interview them to understand what their perspective was. So what I did in the beginning of the calls, I did not tell him who I was, and I did not create any familiarity. So he had no context. I said, assume I know nothing. And for 40 minutes, the CEO of this nonprofit, which is a global nonprofit, not a lightweight, went on to tell me things about their organization, what they did, their mission, how they spent their money, the value that I had never heard. It was blow away. It was completely different than what I thought I knew. At the end of the call, I told him who I was. Do you know what his response to me was? Well, sorry, Steve, I just wasted 40 minutes of your time. And I think Kaylee's point is right on, which is that any attachment that you have to a customer, anything that they perceive as an attachment, Howard, who's on this call, and I can see Howard, but Howard can't see me. Howard expressed his frustrations. You saw him put his hands up. Howard expressed his frustration when he called Lexus and Lexus couldn't tie their shoes because he was just trying to get something happening. And he was frustrated that they didn't understand or they couldn't do it. And that story has repeated itself, I'm sure, in your life 100 times, where we think I'm talking to somebody in Amazon. They should know my history. Why is it so hard for you to look at my order history and find out I did this or check whatever? And we think because they work for a company that we buy from, that they have some level of familiarity with what we actually go through as customers. And the truth is the opposite. And we'll talk about that more as we get into interviews. But this is a bias. It's not a bias just for you. It's a bias for the people you're interviewing. People cannot give you the right answers if you're too close. They can't. It's not because they don't like you. It's not because you're not a good interviewer. It's not because they don't want to. It's just because it is actually psychologically impossible for them to give you that. It's actually called, if you want the psychology term, it's called the familiarity heuristic, HEURISTIC. And Kaylee's a psychology expert, so she could dive into that further. So there you go. All right, key number 3, the secret customer handshake. So I want you to imagine yourself walking down the street of a different country. You're there on vacation, it's summer, maybe it's Portugal, maybe it's Austria, maybe it's Brazil, maybe it's Senegal, maybe it's South Africa, wherever you've gone to visit during your summer vacation. You walk down the street and you say, there are 2 different things you can say to the person you greet. You can say hello in English, or you can speak in their native language. I happen to be German. I was born in Austria. My family was born in Austria. My first language is German. I took my kids back to Austria last summer. We walked down the street, and instead of saying hello, I say Servus, Grüß Gott. Those are very familiar. One of them is a very Southern European Germanic term. It's not used in Hochdeutsch or High German. And they look at me, and someone literally looked at me and said, you dress like an American, but you speak like a German. What's up with that? And I want to make this point for you that is really important for you in customer interviews. When you got on a call with a customer, or you talk with a customer, or you connect on a customer advisory board, there are 2 things that are going to happen within 5 minutes of the start, and they might happen within 30 seconds. That person on the phone is going to decide whether you're worth telling the truth to, or worth being open with, or whether they can trust you, or whether they should just get off this. They're just going to hustle through this and get off this as quick as possible. And that is that you're either going to hit the click point, right, and the conversation goes up from there, or you hit the cliff point and the conversation goes down. And the reason I talk to you about the secret customer handshake is that as you begin having conversations with customers, you might want to practice on some that aren't high risk or high value. Because what you want to do is you want to begin picking up the same thing I did in 2003 when I first discovered this, some of the language that customers use to talk about this company. Now, I'll just make this last point and then we're going to keep moving. I was the speech and natural language product manager at Dictaphone and then at Nuance. I was building commercial language models to address the needs of specific industries. It turns out that every single discipline that exists has a subset of the 130,000 words that exist in the human language. The average human adult uses 40 to 50,000 words. The specialty with the least amount of words is medical. Anybody want to guess which specialty that is? Is it neurology? Is it cardiology? Is it radiology? Anyone? Any guesses? Cardiology, lab. It's actually radiology. Thanks for the guesses. 5,500 words make up the entire lexicon of what my neighbor 2 houses down, who sits in a dark room all day long, the only words he has to say to actually describe every single part of the body and any single situation that he sees on a tomogram, a CT, an MRI, or a scan. I want to make this point to you. Your customers have a very unique language that is distinct to your company. But here's the problem. your company doesn't know it. Your company, especially with people who've been there for 6 months or longer, is populated by people who talk the same way as each other, right? They pick up lingo, they pick up language, and they become either industry fluent or product fluent, but they don't become customer fluent. When I was interviewing farmers last year, I live in the bluest of blue states, right? I have a technology background. Farmers don't trust anyone, certainly not from a blue state. But it turns out my family actually has farmed for several centuries, and I know some of the words to drop. And farmers love to talk about tractors. Those are toys to them. And dropping a few hints, they warmed up. And most of those interviews that started as requests for 25 to 30 minutes went to an hour. Some went to over an hour. I want to ask you as an action item, what's the click point for your customers? That you should write this down. What's your click point? And what's the cliff point? What are the words you need to share? How do you need to lock in your particular business? I can't give you that answer. I'm just telling you it exists. And once you start interviewing customers, when you get between 10 or 20 or 30 interviews in, you will be able to map this out. We're going to show you a tool later on that will help you map some of these things. Okay, next point, Kaylee, your ball.
Awesome. So we like to call this next concept the customer truth gap. So, as was mentioned before, there's a certain language that your company uses to talk about your customers, but there's a completely separate language that the customers use to talk to each other. And not only that, but there are all sorts of things that are of value to your customers that you might not be aware of. And, we know this because Steve has been doing this research for 17 years, right? And has done, I think, in combination between Steve and Jeff, there have been over 3,000 interviews conducted. And, 99.999% of the time, there's almost nothing in common with what stakeholders think customers care about and with what customers actually care about. Now, this is where a very important part of the customer interview process comes in, which is that there is no good news if there's not bad news. If you're not capturing what your stakeholders' hypotheses are in the beginning about what the clients think, then when you reveal the results, people tend to do this thing where they just kind of normalize things. So even if the results end up being very different from what they might have heard before, people kind of go, yeah, that makes sense. I feel like I kind of knew that. But the reality is when you gather those hypotheses up front and you compare that to what the actual results are and showing them specifically some of the, qualitative data, but in a quantitative way, that's where you really get the impact. And you start to show your executives like, oh, we're kind of missing the ball here. We're kind of not messaging to what our clients are actually saying is the most valuable to them. And so capturing those hypotheses in the beginning is an extremely important part of this process.
I'd like to add to that. And yay, my camera finally decided to start. Okay, so there is a great book called Flawless Consulting. And if I want you to think of yourself, there were no customer marketing hires 10 years ago. There just weren't, right? 5, 4, 3 years ago, there were a lot of account-based marketing hires. Kaylee started this conversation or started the presentation by talking about making sure that we don't live in the ice age of the customer marketer. Companies are recognizing we have no idea what our customers say. We need to start using them, and we can't keep inventing or guessing on this stuff. Now, here's the thing. An experience always trumps an opinion. If I try to change my wife's mind about something, or she tries to change my mind about something, I can't. Why? Because her experience outweighs mine. What you need to do when you start your customer project is to interview, write this down, each of the key stakeholders around you that have strong opinions, the head of product, the head of marketing, the head of sales enablement. I don't know what your organization looks like, but whoever that ends up being, you want to interview them, and you want to document what they tell you. Because as Kaylee said, the nature of truth is that when you hear it, you go, I always kind of knew that. You have a very small window in which to demonstrate very clearly that you are the answer to a number of the other problems that exist in the business. And unless there is some pain being introduced to the company, people are not willing to change. The great thing about what you do is you don't have to be the introducer of the pain. All you have to do, and we'll show you how to do this later, is introduce what the customer said and then let that do the work. What do you say when someone says, well, I don't believe that? You go, well, that's fine. We can do what you think. However, just know what we're going to be doing is ignoring what the customers have told us. So maybe you want to think about the implications of that. So I just wanted to add that. All right.
You want me to take this one?
Yeah, we talked about the strong beginning, and the point, and Kaylee picked the graphic for this, which is fantastic, which is you want to get people to relax, right? People are used to being interviewed. People are used to nonsense. I talked to one company that they had a survey firm do surveys for them, and they did outreach, customer interviews. And they gave people like $5, and they just rapid fire conversations, and they're not used to being expertly interviewed by someone who can ask them questions in a way that lets them warm up. Every conversation has an arc. We'll talk about that in a little bit, right? It starts rougher. Somebody has to get comfortable, then people get more comfortable. Then at the end, they often end up restating everything they said at the beginning and doing it more crisply. And you get a lot of the meat in the conversation if you schedule 30-minute interviews in the last 5 minutes. But the way you get people through the arc of that conversation, get them comfortable, get them moving, get them to the end, to basically just reveal the crown jewels, is by starting the conversation with 3 things. 1, you have to create distance between yourself. Remember the law of familiarity? Assume I know nothing. If you hear the words, hey, Bob in sales, or Jennifer in account management, or Jim in so-and-so, or Laura in customer success told me you were going to call, what else do you want to know? You have a problem, and you need to reset their expectation and say, I'm new. I really don't know anything. Assume I know nothing. Why don't you start from the beginning? You've got to do that. Otherwise, they're basically, if I could fill the screen up, 80% of this screen is filled with me. The problem is 80% of the screen is filled with what people assume you know. You can't do that. The second thing you're going to do is you're going to crack a joke in the beginning. And you're going to do that after you start the recording for the call. In fact, we use something called Uber Conference. Uber Conference, I have it set to automatically record. Ding, someone comes in, this conference is being recorded. Record every conversation. Very few of the, Jeff may not want to come off of mic here, but of the last 1,000 interviews, Jeff would probably agree, or Jeff may want to comment. I mean, how many of those folks say, no, I'm not okay being interviewed, or it's recorded, or no, I'm not okay being quoted? 1, 2, almost nobody. So you're going to tell them you're recording. And the reason you're going to tell them you're recording is you're going to say, I don't want to distract you by typing. I'm going to be taking a lot of notes because I really want to hear what you say. And before they get a chance to, sometimes they say, oh, yeah, no problem. But you're going to say, and I promise, quote this verbatim. I've used this for 15 years. It's the best line I have ever heard. And I promise you, nothing you say will be on CNN before 11 p.m. tonight. They're going to laugh. It doesn't matter their age group, if they're older or younger, they use social media, they don't. Everybody gets that. It's done. They laugh and they say, no problem, and move on. And what you have just done is you have caused them to forget anything that happened in the beginning of that interview, separate from whatever you did to set up, and go into a mindset of, okay, I'm ready. If you don't do this, you will not get the kind of insights you want from these interviews. It will not happen. Kaylee, do you want to add something to that?
I'll just add that it works like a charm. I have never said it and not got at least a pretty good chuckle, and it absolutely loosens people up. So a very key part of the process. So talking about crafting and asking powerful questions, this is one of the most critical parts of the process as well. So, in our experience, there's one type of question in particular that is absolutely game changing, and I'll get to that. But since we were just talking about the beginning of the call, what you want to do in the initial stages of the call is start to ask some open-ended questions just to get people talking about themselves. As Steve said, my background is in psychology. People really do love to talk about themselves, no matter who they are, and they love to share their own experiences. So when you ask them simple questions in the beginning, like, tell me a little bit about yourself and the work that you've done at your company, those are the things that start to, well, continue to get people to loosen up and relax and really share what's going on under the hood. In addition to that, a lot of the questions that we craft are really designed to ask specifically for someone's own personal opinion about things. And that's really important as well, because at the very end of an interview, one of the final questions that you're going to ask is, hey, do you mind if we share these results with the company? And you might be sitting there as a customer marketer thinking, okay, if I were to spend an hour interviewing my client, there is absolutely no way that somebody from Salesforce or blah, blah, blah company is going to be okay with me publicly sharing some of these results. But when you craft the interview such that you're asking for that person's specific advice about buying, advice about, the onboarding process, things that the other clients should know, at the end, they are way more likely to say, oh, yes, please go ahead and share this, because you haven't really been asking them questions that are, proprietary to that organization. You're asking them questions that are proprietary just to them and their own experiences and their personal opinions. And with that, the most important type of question that we ask is called rapid framing. Now, this is a neurolinguistic tool where it's really amazing to see happen over and over again. But essentially, you simply state, tell me, what are the top 3 things that you would recommend another person who's evaluating a solution like this should think about before moving forward with a vendor? That's an example. But those, what are the top 2 things? What are the top 3 things? Using that as the framework before you ask the rest of the question, it causes people to do what's called stack ranking. So they immediately start to organize their thoughts in a very, prioritized way, right? And they start to say, okay, so the number 1 most important thing is this. And Steve and I and Jeff as well have all had this kind of hilarious situation arise in an interview where you might ask a question like that, what are the top 3 things that you recommend to other clients who are onboarding with this solution? And they might talk for 20 minutes and then they'll go, oh, wait, I haven't got to number 3 yet. Like, they remember specifically that you asked them, what are the top 3 things? It's really mind-blowing to see that. Anything you wanted to add, Steve?
No, I think that's a great example, but I want you to think about crafting your questions in those terms. So for example, what do you like most about our software? You don't ask that. You say, tell me the top 3 things that you couldn't live without. Tell me the top 3. Here's another very quotable question. Write this down. No one asked this. I'm telling you, no one asked this, and everyone loves to answer it. In fact, it surprises them because it's a surprise question, and it is. What surprises you? Tell me the top 2 or 3 things that surprise you in a positive sense about what we do, about what our software does for you. And they go, oh, so here's the great thing about that. That's a very quotable question. Because now if you recorded them and they say yes, and you feed that back to your sales group, or you feed it to the marketing team, they can go, well, just want you to know the customers are really surprised by our solution that it's able to, and prospects go, really? Wow, that's really cool. And so everything we engineer in these conversations in terms of the questions, and again, we're trying to boil 3 hours and all this stuff into just 45 minutes, but everything we're doing is to create comfort, get the person talking, and move them to repeat themselves, which they often do more crisply, and then finally to give you permission to quote them. And for those of you who do surveys or who are asked to do surveys, I'll just share this chart. Can you guys see this at all? Is that showing
Not
up?
really.
All right. So
a little bit.
If you think about
but
it,
only because I know what it is.
yeah, you know what it is. So you start broad and then you get narrow in a phone interview or in a conversation. You never start with a specific question because people have to warm up. They just came from something else. It's fine. The first 5 minutes is a throwaway portion of the conversation. That's also, by the way, a tool that works for you, because as people start getting more and more narrow, people want to be precise. They want to give you the right answer. So they're going to go back and say, hey, can I answer that question again? Or can I want to add to the other question you asked me. That's how people work. That is not the same, totally different than if you do a survey. In a survey, right, an email survey you send, you start with something very narrow and then you go broad. The very narrow is what's your role? What's your title? What state do you live in? To get people in the habit of answering. Then you move to broader and broader things and then you go text box. So, but I just want you to tune your mind, and I want to tune your eyeballs in to see something. And I'll just use this to introduce the retinal activating system, and I should have introduced this before. A friend of mine is a molecular biologist and a patent attorney, and he described this concept called the retina eyes activating system. And here is how it works. You ever notice that when you're looking to buy a new car, all of a sudden you see the same car everywhere on the road, but you never noticed them before? So I'm trying to tune your eyes to begin seeing things inside of customer conversations that the average person, the average marketer is not going to be able to see. So let's hit the next point. Key 7, just want to be mindful of time as well. Okay, so I've seen several questions come in. We're going to get to those. Thank you for asking them. I know some of you missed the early portion and you've said, well, I missed what you said about this, so that we'll get to that in the Q&A, okay? So I just want to acknowledge that so you can enjoy the rest of the time and just be here. I want everyone to be 100% present for this next 2 slides. Here's why. When I started my career and I would talk to senior executives that had more experience than I did, that had higher titles than I did, that whatever, right? I couldn't win any arguments with them. They're like, well, what do you know about our industry? Well, what do you know about our products? Well, how do you know this, right? So they would dismiss me. And some of us have, decades of experience and some of us don't. But many of us are in companies with products we've never sold before, in industries we've never worked in before, and we're addressing issues we've never had before. And so what people tend to do is they tend to lump what's called qualitative interviews into this category of vague. And they tend to put surveys, quantitative stuff, into this category that they call crisp or precise. And I want to tell you, hands down, that's nonsense, but you've got to use the right tool. And I don't know how I tripped on this tool. I've never seen it anywhere else. And in fact, I've been hired for roles, actually, not just for consulting clients because they've hired me, but literally executive roles, because a founder saw this slide and said, oh my gosh, you're speaking my language. You're telling me, you're taking the fuzzy and you're making it clear. You're taking the subjective and you're making it objective. You're taking the broad and you're making it narrow. So let's go to the next slide. Okay, so I'm going to help you avoid this. I love this picture. This is it. You should screenshot this, and this is how you're going to deliver your interview results to whoever your executive team is once you have 10 or 12 under your belt. Don't deliver ahead of time, by the way. Kaylee can talk about that in a minute. This I call the customer matrix or the customer results matrix, and it's quite simple. On the left-hand side, I don't know if anybody can see my pointer, but Kaylee, if you can go far left, On the left-hand side are the names of the people you interviewed. By color across each of these columns, or the sections of this chart, are the different sections of what we would ask. So for example, Kaylee, if you hover on the green one, what surprised you in a positive sense? So this is how we take answers to a specific, precise question, and then we take their exact words, the exact answers, and we left this fuzzy on purpose because we're trying to make sure that people can't decode who this is for, and just cut off the customer information. So this is private. But what you can see is, now go a couple to the right, Kaylee, you can see another question, Ben, here in orange. What would you say our secret sauce is? What's our secret sauce? That's another great question. You should copy that one. What's our secret sauce? You should use that one. And you're going to use this, and what you're going to do when you present this, you may have done this when you looked at this, right? You look at the colors, but then what do? You look at the stacks. You look at the volume. So Kaylee, if you go to surprises number 3, right? So I think we interviewed 8 people or 10 people here. So 6 out of 8 or 6 out of 10 said that mattered to them. Then if you go over further into another column, the orange, the second one in, there's like 6 or 7 that said they care about it. Immediately, even if you've only done 10 interviews, you've just shown somebody something in a quantitative way that they assumed was qualitative. And Jeff can comment on this when he comes off mute, and if he wants to comment later in the Q&A, that we've never seen these answers. Jeff and I did a study for, I don't know if it was Cisco or HP or somebody else, and we interviewed, I don't know, was it 50 people or 40 people or something? And Jeff and I would talk, and after interview 10, in the next 10, we'd be like, yeah, nothing new. Then the next 10, from 20 to 30, nothing new. Hearing the same thing over and over. Interview 30 to 40, nothing new. The world has this idea in their heads, and they're going to push back on you and say, yeah, but we need to do something that's statistically significant. And I'm okay, and we do this. Once you do the interviews and once you have the themes, you want to send a survey out, you go right ahead. But I'm going to tell you something. In 17 years of doing this work, I've never seen the arc of the answers or the substance of the answers change once we have the trending down. Now, am I saying that in every situation you can interview 10 or 12 customers and it'll magically solve all the problems? No. However, what I am saying is if you interview 10 or 12 customers, it can be enough for you to see these very clear patterns. We changed one company's trajectory of their marketing. They were selling a very sophisticated piece of software to farmers. They couldn't get a lead to save their life. We found its trends. We created a buyer's guide. We'll show you that later because now we're going to talk about implementation. And they generated several $100,000 of contracts in the first 90 days after we launched. And we did it with 8, whatever the number, however my hands work, 8 pieces of input. Because if you do it right, you get a lot. And that's the other thing. I want to relieve you of this idea that, oh my gosh, how am I got to talk to 50 or 100 customers or 1,000 customers. You don't. Find a specific issue, find 10 or 12, 15 at most. You don't really need to do more than that. I get you might need to make your executive team happy. 10 or 12, 15, have those conversations, put the results into this chart. No one has ever seen anything like this. Okay, next slide. Or do you want to comment on this?
Yeah, I just wanted to point out that, nothing that we ever put up at the top of these matrices are anything that we are inventing. So that's the common theme throughout this is you're not inventing the data. You are literally taking the exact language that these clients are using to describe things and putting it directly up there. And what you're seeing are patterns. So this idea that your customers have this secret language that they're using is absolutely true. We've just seen it over and over and over again, that they are using the same types of words. It's not just similar themes and this, that, and the other. No, people use the same types of words. And what happens when you just capture this is you're able to translate that into your messaging and make that connection with other buyers.
Why don't you go to the next slide? Because I think, okay, so I want I want to make this point, and I want you to feel something here. You may be the most important hire your company has ever made, whether they recognize it or not, because no one else is thinking, what do the customers actually say? Everyone else is executing on a bunch of priorities. You have a very unique role to bring in customer surprises and customer truth. We call it, as Kaylee said, the customer truth gap, and affect everything. So Kaylee just used one of these, right? How do I change what's the message? What should the content be? Well, go back to the customer matrix and figure out what questions they had. How do I onboard new sales reps? Give them this in the recordings. Put stuff out on Slap 5, which, by the way, is one of the most brilliant ways for you to share this. And if you're a Slap 5 customer, congratulations. And if you're not a Slap 5 customer, you need to look at Slap 5, because you can take the recordings, you can cut them up, you can put a picture there. We'll show you more later. But this allows you to slowly pivot from being part of the marketing team to being the impetus, right? The driver of what happens in this company. Very few companies are mature enough to think, what I need is customer insights, and that's going to help me grow. Because I already know, because the way they say they think they get answers to customers is, well, we're selling it, so everybody wants it. But they don't know. There's so many granularities beneath that. So we've got 12 minutes left. Let's jump to the next few slides and then get to the Q&A, because there are several questions. Okay, I just want to make this point. This top left, this is not a workshop exercise. What you should not do, unless you're gathering a hypothesis, this is the only caveat. You want to workshop people about what they think, customers, so you can get it and record it. I'd record it. I literally turn my recorder on in these meetings. Everybody who knows me knows I record everything. Okay, part of that is because I can't write as fast, but part of that is so I can play it back and document it. So here's some other examples. You can get, when you get the replay of this, it's fine. But on the bottom right, you'll see a buyer's guide for farmers on how to choose stuff. Kaylee, why don't you go to the next slide? Again, I just want to honor people. Okay, coming back to the customer interview course. We have tried to squeeze a huge amount of stuff into a short amount of time. If you didn't screenshot this before, screenshot it now. We will be letting people know more about the course and when it's available and all that good stuff. In the meantime, Kaylee, why don't you go to the next slide? So in the meantime, we've got a couple of things, gifts for you. So one, we have a cheat sheet. I have never given this away to anybody who's not a paying client in the last decade. It's 6 pages, includes some of our best questions. If you want it, type cheat sheet in the chat board, chat box. Kaylee will get it to you. Intensive course, if you want information about that, intensive course, we'll get it to you. In fact, we haven't even launched it yet, so if you want to be an early customer, a beta customer, get a favored rate, that's great. We also talked with Jeff about a breakout session on customer interview techniques. Jeff has been asking all attendees, what do you want the birds of a feather breakouts to be about? I am willing and Kaylee and I are willing to have a jam session, in fact, on a regular basis with folks around customer interviews and customer interview techniques, but vote for it. And if you want something, if you need something, you can screenshot this. If you want something more specific, you want some guidance, you can click Kaylee's Calendly link there and get on her calendar and she can give you some coaching. So we have a number of questions. Thanks for some of the accolades. I really appreciate Kathleen saying that, the matrix was brilliant. I don't even know how we tripped on that. I mean, God, from your lips to God's ears. So thank you. Okay, so questions. Kaylee, can you see the chat box or?
I'm gonna go ahead and stop sharing so that I can. Okay. Oh wow.
Steve,
okay.
Steve,
Lots of interest here.
Yeah, I was just answering the ones where people asked to repeat something. So I actually answered those people's questions in the chat,
Okay.
like the CNN line and things like that.
Okay, so AIPMM stands for the Association of International Product Marketing. Wait, what's the second M?
And management, yeah.
And management. Yes, so this is actually the founder, Therese, was the product manager for Norton Security at one point, and they wanted to kill that product. And by doing similar work to what we've just discussed, she has made that into a household name. And so from there, she pivoted to found the Association of International Product Marketing and Management.
And she was able to do that. She inherited that Norton Antivirus is named after Peter Norton, who was a founder, and he was kind of a curmudgeon. And she basically, Norton, I mean, she saved that product, but she saved it by knowing the customers and doing some of the things that we've talked about. And we've been birds of a feather for a decade and a half as I've worked with them. I see this question here. So do you take notes or not take notes? Sue asked. So you do take notes. There's you'll notice that Kaylee and I talk a lot, and Jeff probably would, as would the other folks that are part of the Customerx board, like Dana and Howard and other folks. And they would say that there's a bunch of brain science here, right? Because this is about humans and understanding humans. So when you take notes, it accesses a different center of your brain than when you type. So my recommendation is that you write notes. The second thing is I try not to overnote, because what I want to do is, this is a dance between you and the customer, right? This is a choreographed conversation. And when we've hired researchers to do this, some of the ones that have struggled the most, and this would be instructive to you if you like this, if you need linear structure to interview customers, you want to be aware of this. You know, you want to set up as much of the structure as possible beforehand to allow your brain and for you to be comfortable doing improv in the middle of the interviews themselves. And so the other reason why you don't type is that when you type, it actually uses a different portion of your brain and it changes the way your tone of voice comes across. And I'm not sure if you've ever had this happen, but you know, I remember I called my mother a few years ago and she's like, Stephen, what are you doing? Well, you're not focusing on me. I'm like, what? She goes, you're doing something else. I'm like, oh, I'm sorry, I'm typing. She's like, stop typing. People can hear, they can pick up. There is a difference in voice, and I have many other stories that I can back that up with. But what I would tell you to do is record, record, record. That's why the CNN joke in the beginning is so important. And by the way, the last question you want to end these interviews with, and Kaylee said it, she said it slightly differently, but is, may quote you. May we quote you? 4 words. Keep it simple. And people will say, 90% of people will say, sure. 9% of people will say, sure, but I would like to see a copy. And 1% of people will say no. And it might be less than 1%. I don't know, Jeff, what your experience is with that, but generally people don't push back on that one. If you've handled the interview right, they will let you do just about anything because you're giving them a voice. You are one of the few people in that company that listens to them without a goal of a first time clear, getting you off the phone in 7 minutes, or doing something else, or getting a renewal. You're just talking to them. That is incredibly empowering and validating as a customer.
And Steve, while you're looking at the next one, Steve, let me just add, and I posted this to Sue in the chat. When I'm taking notes during an interview, it's primarily to take down reminders of what I want to probe deeper into, because as you said, this is not a linear process, but there is a story arc. I mean, there is an arc to the interview, and but what you don't want to do is just ask a question, wait for them to answer, and then ask the next question. And so what I'm constantly doing is writing down notes of where to probe deeper, because you hardly ever get the best answer the first time they answer it. Sometimes you have to say, well, give me an example of that, or why was that so painful for you, or how did you make that, what did you tell your wife about that when you got home that night, or things like that really get to the emotion, because the best insights you can get are the ones that are wrapped in an emotion.
Totally. And you know, I always mute myself after I ask questions because I want to be in conversation. Remember, you're doing this for 2 reasons. One, to give them white space. This is not a conversation, right? This is a discovery exercise on your part. The second is, if you're going to use slap 5 or you're going to repeat this, you do not want your breathing, your coughing, or anything in there, because I can guarantee it will happen at the worst time. Okay, so do you ever ask leading questions to drive an answer you're looking for, or you just ask open-ended? Well, so remember the open-ended, you might start with, tell me about yourself, and tell me a little bit about your company. What was going on in your company that caused you to look for the solution? Then we use the rapid framing, right? So we're not just asking open-ended questions. We might say, what are the top 3 things that blank caused you to struggle? Top 3 things that you were trying to fix. Top 3 solutions you looked at. Top 3 things you would advise someone else to buy this with. So we're not actually asking purely open-ended questions. Of
And
course.
sorry, if I could jump in, Kimberly, I think one of the important things about this process also is that it's not just about the warm and fuzzy. What gives you the power in doing these types of interviews is that you're getting both the good and the bad. So while, yes, sometimes we do ask questions like what surprises you in a positive sense that obviously are going to lead to a positive answer, at the end of the day, we're not driving towards something like, did using this help you build revenue? We don't drive towards those specific things, and we craft the questions in such a way that they will naturally kind of come to that if it's something that's important to them. And also, there's a lot oftentimes as a customer marketer, there may be a lot of problems that you want to solve, but it's a real challenge because you sort of have to call the baby ugly in order to do that. But what's so fantastic about capturing the customers, direct feedback and not only the positive, but also some of the things that can be improved upon, is that you're not having to call the baby ugly. The most important people to your CEO and those are the ones who are going to actually utter those words. And when it presents itself as a pattern, which it will, if it's impacting the business, over 10 interviews, you will see a pattern of something. If there's something negative, it's incontrovertible. The CEO can't argue with the type of data that you present.
But in terms of leading questions, of course, I would ask, what's the impact been on your business? What would happen if we took this away from your company? Yes, I'm not saying, and I think this ties back to Jeff, we're not saying don't lead them someplace, but what we are saying is you don't want to ask them, what you don't want to have come out of this is what I Jeff is kinder. He calls it a happy quote. I call it a stupid quote. You guys did an excellent job for implementing our enterprise. That's useless. It doesn't answer any questions. It's the second or third answer, so you can probe further.
And Kim is asking now, do you do the same process to capture case studies? So my response to that is we do. We don't do a typical traditional case study. We're doing case study 2.0s, which if you're Slap 5 customer, you've heard that before. But, we are surfacing these direct quotes and even the audio, which is way more powerful than just reading what a technical writer has written about a certain product, especially when it comes to things like the buying process. Because at the end of the day, buyers want to hear from their peers, and they actually do. I think it's something like 70% of B2B tech buyers said that they evaluate solutions by talking to their peers. And so when you present what their peers are already saying about your products and the ones who have already bought, that is so much more impactful than the sort of traditional case study.
Let me just share something. So customers, I have a little experience in this. My family raises bees, okay? And at one point we had 72 hives generating between 3/4 of a ton and a ton of honey a year. Bees are funny. If there's a guard bee on the lip, if you approach the hive, there's several guards. And if you bum rush the hive, they're going to attack you. In fact, they might call everybody out to swarm you. But bees are happy to share. If you are calm and you open the lid kindly and you smoke them, right? You use smoke, they'll let you take out honey, but you can't take out too much, because if you take out more than 50% of the honey in the hive gets sick and dies, because they actually need enough honey left to continue operations. This is not the first time you're going to be in relationship with this customer. You're starting the conversation. So the way I think about it, if I were you, is have a good conversation. One of the other questions you're going to ask them at the end is, do you mind if we have any other questions, do you mind if we reach out to you? Sure. Most people say yes. You're not going to take them up on that yet. You're going to send them something nice. You might even send them a Christmas card. When we went to Austria, I sent a bunch of customers that we'd interviewed chocolate from Europe, from Germany. And then a few months later, I called them back and I said, hey, I'd really like to come out to your farm. And would you mind if we come and video you? Sure. Want to ride around a tractor? Yes, absolutely. Can I come during spring planting? Absolutely. So this is an arc. There is an arc to the relationship. People hurt the beehive or get stung when they ask for too much honey too soon. So just think about that. There's a lot of sweetness in there. There's a lot of things your company will thrive on. There's even a proverb in the Old Testament written 3,000 years ago that says, to someone who's hungry, the sweetness of honey brightens his eyes. Like it makes him, that's the power of what you have. But you do have to manage what you're doing. And part of the reason, and Jeff can talk more about this because he's basically all of Slap 5 is addressing this idea that I can have people interview for case studies with his one quote. But I mean, I never asked them when we flew out to video them if we could make a case study of them. We never asked them that. Case study is like asking someone if you can have I'm sorry, I'm going to colonoscopy. Like, really? Why would I want to put myself through that? I'm sorry, I'm in my 50s, so I'm going to say this, but like, case study? No, I'm not going to expose. No. Why? Because this is about them and their experience. That's the other reason. The other reason you do that is that's how you get around the corporate approval process for, case studies. Oh, if you want a case study, I got to run this through legal, right? You might as well kiss that one goodbye. I never out of that term. Jeff, you might want to comment on it.
Yeah, well, and that's why I only use the term case study 2.0 to differentiate from the classic third person written case study by a tech writer where it's challenge, solution, result, and then the happy quote in the sidebar. All that does is make you look exactly like all your competitors. It does not actually showcase the voice of the customer. And Steve and I have done, what'd you say, Kelly? I think combined it's like 3,000 plus interviews now of both buyers and customers. And with the buyer side, never once has a buyer ever said that, yeah, I read a case study and that influenced my decision, because we asked them exactly what materials, what information from the vendor, what influenced you in a positive way. But you know what they say every time? It was hearing from other customers about their experiences and what went well and what went bad. And then we also asked them one of my favorite questions, because to answer Kimberly's question and a little bit of Josh's as well, is that I call this double dipping, right? You can be doing these customer interviews that are both good for getting pure insights to feed into your organization, as well as getting the customer proof and evidence in audio and video format, first person, that you then aggregate together and mix and match in different ways to create sales and marketing materials. You can do that from the same interview in the same story arc. And the reason why that works is because who would have known that the same issues that buyers want to hear about are the same issues we're uncovering when you do these interviews correctly, with the goal of infusing insights into your company. They don't want to hear the happy quotes. I call it the BS questions, right? And they don't want to read the BS stories either, because every case study is, company was in a world of hurt. They came to us. We were their knight in shining armor, and now they're living happily ever after, earning 180,000% ROI. Right? That's every case study. But what buyers really want is they want to know. They want a crystal ball into what life is like as a customer. And the way they get that is to know what went well, what went bad, what's advice that you would give to somebody who's just starting over, things like that. And that's where your PR teams are going to probably choke when you say, oh, I'm going to put out there what this customer said could be improved. What? PR people, because they have to put a positive spin on everything. But if you want to earn trust, and at the end of the day, our business is all about trust. That's our currency. And so that's why I'd say, make sure you balance that.
Jeff, you reminded me of something. That was a great set of comments. You should listen to Jeff, because again, as I said, we have partnered on so many of these studies. And at the end of every study, what we feature is a question that says, separate and distinct from this, forget about this vendor or this company I work for. You've been through this. If I was your friend coming to you and you were trying to save me bumps and headaches, and I said, okay, Josh, okay, Susan, okay, Sarah, Dana, Jennifer, tell me the top 3 things that I should think about when I'm about to choose a solution like X, whatever I'm doing, solving, relationship management software, or, security software. Tell me the top 3 things I should think about to make sure that I don't scrape my knee the way you did and you've been through it. What would you tell me? What's your advice? That is unbelievably powerful advice, because now they're giving you their advice. Even if they said, well, I got to be cautious about anything I mention about the company, that's all quotable stuff. That's what you put into the buyer's guide, which, by the way, nobody does right. Everybody creates a buyer's guide that says, this is why you should do it, and this is what I say, and this is what I think. And then you and I read these things and we go, who wrote this? Oh, it's the content team of the company. Why would I even trust them? But if all you do is take the comments and the advice your customers give, those top 3 things, and you feed it back to customers, I mean, that's mind-blowingly effective. Because then, and you can feed that to your sales guys, your sales enablement guys, and the sales guy can say, well, other customers we've interviewed have said these 3 things are important. Wow, that's impressive. Can you share with me? Can I get more information? Sure, I'll share with you the recordings from one of those customers. That's the power of this. You don't have to ask for the ROI. Oh, and by the way, guess what's happening? It's the same thing that's happening after 9/11. It's happening today. Everyone's starting to talk about ROI again because CFOs are ratcheting down their spending and it's becoming irrelevant. Farmers, I had farmers literally call me. They got guys telling me, I'm using the farmers because it's one of the most skeptical examples I can share. I love farmers. My family are farmers. I'm just saying. If I could tell you the number of people that call me and tell me, if you give me $1 an acre, I can make you an extra $100,000 a year. They're like, I don't believe you. You know nothing about farming. You know nothing about my business, because it's not that simple. You just made yourself irrelevant. It isn't that simple. Your life isn't that simple. Your customers' lives isn't that simple. Don't take what everybody else does. It's not about ROI. And if that exists, they will tell you, because you will have made them comfortable enough. Kyle
So
made.
Rebecca asked, do we have examples of some well-written case studies that don't just follow the typical format? I have a particular example in mind that I will send to her in the chat, and then I will also send in the Customerx Slack channel as well, in case anybody else is interested.
And just as a preview, Rebecca, the word written is the key word here, because nobody wants to read a third-person account, as I said earlier, of what a case study has been. They want to hear that first person. They want to hear the emotion in the voice, and that can really only come with video or audio. And it doesn't always have to be video. Sometimes, audio can be 99.9% is effective, because the way that the human brain decides whether to trust somebody who's speaking or anybody who's they're consuming information from is from the tone of voice. It's not from the exact words they say, but it's from how they say it. If they hear them reading from a script, or if it sounds staged, or if it sounds like they've been paid to do it or rewarded in some way, they're just not going to believe it. So again, the whole game here, we're in the trust game, right? Our whole job is to earn trust with our current customers, as well as the prospects who we want to influence with our customer's voice.
Right. So Kimberly, you asked the question. I think we answered it, but if we didn't, once you type in the chat box. Josh asked, how do you apply your approach when the customer has already shared feedback? Well, so I guess it just depends on, and I'll let you guys add in, it depends on how they've shared their feedback. I'll use this to make a point. You never ask a customer, what are we doing wrong? What don't you like about us? That'll come out in a conversation. Remember, this is a conversation. There's an arc of relationship. You're starting something. The value of starting something and not over asking from the bees is you get to go back and get more honey. Hey, why don't you ask them about X or Y? You become their friends. You become somebody inside the business that has better relationships to the company and that they can tell the truth to, or what they like and what they don't like. But in terms of going back to them after they've given feedback, you might want to time it. I don't know if they were actually interviewed. If they gave an answer on a survey, what you can say is, hey, I saw you shared some feedback. I'd like to share, I'd love to get a little bit more of your perspective. That actually brings up something else, which is honorariums. This shouldn't be free. These are not $5 Starbucks gift card conversations. This is $50 Amazon gift card conversations. And to be honest, some of the studies that Jeff and I have done together, we pay people $150 or $300 right? Because these are CTOs or CIOs or CFOs or C-level executives who are really busy, and that's what it takes to get their time. You're going to have to figure that the way that works out, but that actually might be also useful as you think about how do I set my budgets and what do I go ask for? You know, if there's somebody who's really busy, you got to honor them. You guys want to add something to that?
I had responded separately to Josh about that question and said, you know, I'm happy to talk to him about his specific situation, but you know, something that's very important is making sure that the person who's doing this type of interview is not somebody who's involved with the day-to-day with that client. So if it was you and it is you who's involved in the day-to-day, you're going to have to find somebody else. You know, it can be somebody from your team, but somebody who has a little bit of distance and can create even more distance on the call by saying, you know, I have no background, those types of things, to do the interview, because I would imagine whatever project was done before was probably not quite done in this format. And so that's another piece of the answer.
And if I could just add to the Josh, at the end of every single customer interview, especially when I'm going for customer voice to use in their sales and marketing, and I'm really trying to find value points and things like that, the things that buyers want to hear about. At the end of every single interview, the customer always says to me, and this is my client's customer, by the way, not my own. They always say to me, "Thank you. I really enjoyed this. Thank you so much for talking to me today." And you know why? It's because we don't do it like the typical BS case study interview, right? We are really doing it in such a way that they get to relive their success. They get to relive all that effort that they're so proud of that caused us to identify them as a spokesperson in the first place. And they come out of that like charged up, feeling so good about themselves. And they often also say, you know, this is better than anything your company has ever done to capture my insights. This is more enjoyable, and I feel like what I told you is more meaningful than anything else I've ever told you. And so why did you wait so long? You know? I would have done this 3 years ago if only you had asked.
Awesome. Yeah. And so, by the way, Jeff doesn't often get that jazzed. Like, he's moving around. You can hear his mic moving around, and he's right. Doing this right is being in the surprise business. That's why we said early on, this is about, you know, not being extinct in 3 years because there's another marketing fad, but being the game changers in your field. By the way, the other piece in terms of interviewing, a lot of companies will say, or some companies will say, oh yeah, that's owned by so-and-so, he's the account exec. He's going to be on the call with you. That is an absolute no-no. Never do that, because then they're trying not to offend the guy who's their main contact. So everything, and because of the law of familiarity or the familiarity heuristic, they're not going to give you the whole truth. They can't. It's too familiar. Back to what Kaylee said, you know, you want to definitely create distance, but never have somebody who's. Jeff and I did an interview once with the guy we worked with on a project we did, and this guy knew me and talked for 30 minutes, shot the breeze for half the time. And Jeff turns to me at the end of that call and goes, "We learned nothing from that conversation. He was just all stuff." Kaylee, you got a question from Kimberly where she was asking how much time you would ask to have the discussion.
Yep. And I replied and said, you know, we always just ask for 30 minutes and end up pretty much getting an hour. I mean, and you know, just to be frank, a lot of the interviews that I've done are with C-suite. You know, it's a CMO of a huge tech company, and we still end up going over time. I don't think I've even had the experience of having to cut off a conversation and not getting to the meat, right? I think, you know, 40 minutes to an hour is very typical for how long these conversations actually go.
And if you're overwhelmed by the idea of having to transcribe, and Jeff, I think you want to say something, so I just want to inject one thing. You know, we pay a transcription firm to do this. You can use Rev. Rev is okay. We use a transcription firm. It's Gail Drennan Transcription down in wherever she's in the Ozarks. Find one you want, but there's something about getting a transcription back that actually is a conversation with quotation marks and punctuation that it makes it completely different to navigate. So in terms of your budget, right, you want some kind of platform that you can use to make calls or record the calls on. Uber Conference is 16 bucks a month, maybe it's 17 now. You want a budget for honorariums, so $50 Amazon gift cards, whatever you decide to do, or maybe more. Don't know what you need, who your customer base is. The third is you want a budget for a transcription service. And I would do that if you can. I'd find a service that has people, because if you build a relationship and you're doing that on a regular basis, you can go back to the transcriptionist who does a transcription and say, hey, remember that project we did in September? Did anybody say this? So now, right, most of you are a one-person shop, right? If you're not a Slap 5 customer, you're a one-person shop. And you might want to look at Slap 5 because Slap 5 will help you with all this. But if you're not, and I get no commission by saying that, I'm just telling you. But what you want to do is you want to build a base of data and facts on these are the best practices we need to use in doing this. And you want to build a team to back you up. And if you can find somebody who can do transcription for you and do it well, you're going to pay $1.25 a minute, maybe $1.50 a minute. It's absolutely money well spent, because what's going to happen is your executive team might say, well, I want to see all the transcripts. Well, what happens when you give them garbage? Now you look like a dingbat, but you put in tons of time. People are really funny. The formatting of whatever you give them changes their perspective. That's why that customer matrix works so well.
So thank you, Steve and Kaylee. This was fantastic. As you can tell, it brought out my inner geek, my recovering analyst head, and so I can't get enough of this. I can't get enough of this, and I can see the passion from you guys as well.